Audio made possible by www.jackettome.com. Audio Fanfiction Productions presents Wide Awake. Fanfiction written by Angskata003. Fanfiction inspired by the Twilight Saga written by Stephanie Meyer. Chapter 31. Brownie Drop Defeats. Bella's point of view. The meadow was silent for a long moment, while I gazed out at the grass blowing in the wind. It just pissed me off even more. All Edward we wanted was one day away from all of this. Away from bad memories and pressure, and just crap. No matter how far I ran, or how normal I thought I felt, it was always there, just waiting for me to experience one moment of happiness, so it could laugh in my face. Edward sighed from beside me, but I didn't look at him. I didn't want my bitterness directed at him.
I didn't fucking mean it like that, Bella. I promise.
He whispered forlornly. And of course, he may not have intentionally meant to say it, but it was in the back of his head. Because it was the truth. I could live in denial all I wanted, but it would never change the fact that I wasn't normal. I pushed and shoved it all aside the best I could as I turned to shrug at him with a smile. I couldn't blame Edward for any of it. It was just a fact of my life. His green eyes looked sad and remorseful as he gazed at my incredibly forced smile.
You know, that shit doesn't matter to me.
He whispered as he stroked my hand lovingly, accepting. And I just smiled back. I ruined the day, and all I really wanted was to go home and wallow in my own misery and embarrassment for a few hours. Edward seemed to sense this as he stood up from the ground and held his hand out to me. I got cold as we walked back to the riverfront, and Edward gave me his jacket. I was wondering if that wasn't the only reason he wore it in the first place. And the thought just made me feel impossibly worse. Because he was always trying to make me comfortable and avoid crap like this. And now he thought I wasn't ready, that the episode had proved him right, and the chances of him touching me like that again were so small it made me want to growl in frustration. My own broken traitor mind was battling with my heart, instincts, wants, and desires. And just like always, it beat me. He said he loved me in the gazebo afterwards. He showed it when he looked into my eyes and caressed my hand. And I caressed his as I told him I loved him back, the one with the ring on it. Because I did love him. And I wanted to yell it into my own head so that it would see there was nothing to be scared of. When he kissed me that night at his balcony door, I was pushy. Silently begging him to just try it again, and maybe this time would be different. But he wouldn't do it. He told me he loved me again before he went to sleep, and he showed it in his loving caresses as I stroked his hair and hummed to him. School was school. Stares and whispers and snickers directed at the very thing I hated about myself more in that moment than any other. And Edward was there, walking with me and making me feel better with his electricity as he glared at all the people and took me to every class. At lunch I let my hood down because he liked it. Afterwards he leaned into my hair and whispered in my ear that he loved me, and he showed it when he stroked my hair and caressed my neck. We sat in front of Alice and Jasper and watched them talk and behave like a normal happy couple. He held my hand in biology under the table so that no one would stare. And as we stood in front of the gym doors, he kissed me softly on the cheek and told me he loved me again, showing it to me right in front of Stanley and all her witches, and not paying 1 second of attention to them. I listened when they talked and gossiped. I didn't usually do that in the locker room when I had to dress out. But I was still feeling bitter, and figured that at least I could live vicariously through the very person who Edward could touch and did. Probably quite thoroughly. James avoided any and all eye contact with me, just like Friday. I think I probably scared the crap out of him, but I couldn't really seem to care. Something about the bruise on my nose just fueled the bitterness. Edward was waiting for me when the bell rang, looking concerned like he always did after every class, and putting his arm protectively around me as we walked to the parking lot. Before I got into the Porsche, he kissed my forehead and whispered against my skin that he loved me, and he showed it as he opened my door for me and helped me inside. Alice was being stupid about the whole thing. She was warming up to the idea of us, she just wouldn't admit defeat. So I kept my mouth shut as we drove home, wondering what would be the thing that finally broke her and made her realize how incredible Edward really was. I was pushy again at the balcony door, and I felt so ridiculous and pathetic for doing it, but I was just praying he would try it again. Just once more, just to see if my mind was finally falling in line with my heart. He didn't. He told me he loved me before we went to sleep. And he showed it as he stroked my cheek with his hand and held me to him tightly. And I wanted to scream and yell at him that I knew he loved me and I knew it didn't matter to him if he could touch me like that. It just pissed me off more. It mattered to me and I wanted it to matter to him just a little bit. Some disappointment would have been really nice. Instead, I was met with acceptance. Our whole week was like that. Filled with understanding I love yous and the occasional I fucking love you. He towered by my side as we walked the halls, a silent guardian as he held my waist and glared at the passers-by, looking like he was just waiting for someone to push him, daring them to get close to me or say the wrong thing. I needed it. I resented it. I adored it. He began touching me more day by day. In school, in the cafeteria, in his room. His hands were always on me when we were close enough, touching my arms, hands, cheek, neck, waist, shoulders, and never anywhere else. When I came over on Tuesday night, he seemed occupied with something, and I still pushed him. And he still backed away. I fought and battled to swallow it down like a bitter pill. It's not his fault. He was only protecting me, he was only loving me. And he certainly told me enough. It was 5 times on Tuesday. I did my best to bask in it, let it abate the bitterness I was feeling for as long as possible. It allowed me genuine smiles and the occasional chuckle. But there were bad days. For us both. Wednesday was Edward's. He was walking with me to lunch, curling me into his side, and weaving us around the people in the hallway with his usual ease and grace. I was wrapped in the serenity of his touch and loving embrace as someone walked around the corner right into our path. It was only an accident, easily avoided, as Edward hastily halted his steps and turned protectively into me to avoid a collision with the brown-haired boy, who immediately stopped as well. Edward was not so forgiving about the whole thing.
Watch where the fuck you're going, dickhead.
He snapped at the boy in a harsh tone, glowering at him. The young brown-haired boy narrowed his eyes as Edward steered us past him. And just as we were nearly out of hearing range, he had to make the worst possible comment.
Fuck your mother, Cullen.
He screamed into the hall. Edward stopped mid-stride, and I felt every muscle in his body constrict around me in tension at the comment that was meant to be far less offensive than it actually was. He couldn't have known. He made to turn us around and back towards the brown-haired boy, who was about to have a very unfortunate broken something, or everything. But I stopped him, hastily tugging him into an empty classroom. He turned his angry glower at me as I yanked and pulled desperately against his strength to get him inside. I eventually did, but probably only because he allowed me to. I shut the door quickly, pushing my back against it to save the life of the clueless boy. Edward paced around the empty room rigidly as he raked his fingers through his hair in frustration and anger.
What the fuck was that for?
He growled, stopping his pace momentarily to narrow his eyes at me. His green eyes were darkened with malice as his nostrils flared, and his fists clenched at his sides. I sighed, knowing his anger wasn't meant to be directed at me. If you hurt him, they'll suspend you, I explained cautiously, trying not to upset him anymore. He threw his hands in the air in frustration.
So fucking what?
He roared at me in a loud voice that instinctively made me recoil. I used the only excuse that would matter to him. I'd be here alone all week, I said, quietly, knowing that he wouldn't like the idea of me walking the halls without him by my side to protect me. His face fell minutely before he growled in frustration, and flopped